What's up, fam? I apologize for the light behind me. I'm going to try and block it as much as I can, but I'm going to check out... Okay, so I started watching this video called Your Brain and Blast Injuries. And I got about 15 seconds into it, and I decided, you know what, I'm just going to do a reaction to it instead of not doing a reaction. So this is kind of a personal thing for me. I was a husky operator or a combat engineer doing route clearance in Afghanistan. So I was a guy in this one-man vehicle. This vehicle is designed to blow up. So it's a V-shaped hole. It can take blasts, and it's kind of designed to where, like, if it blows up, you can put it back together real quick and keep moving forward, kind of a thing. The only thing is, you need an operator inside of it. So that was my job, was to be in front of the convoys, and essentially just clearing roads of bombs and IEDs and things like that. And I was blown up 3 times. And that's nothing to be proud of. As a husky operator, you want to find all the IEDs before they find you. But, yeah, I was struck 3 times, direct hits. And I've always been curious because there isn't really anything out there that somebody can be like, hey, this is how you should feel after being blown up 3 times. You know, there's nothing out there that I can compare, like, what I'm feeling to. So I'm kind of on my own about it. And so, like, I have stomach issues, and internally, you know, like, I just want to know, like, what's going on. So we'll see what this video has to say, and that's about all I have to say before I start.
Have you ever wondered about the invisible effects of a blast from landmines, rocket-propelled grenades, or improvised explosive devices?
Blast injuries are one of the most common causes of traumatic brain injury on the battlefield today. Blast injuries are caused by the impact from a complex pressure wave generated by an explosion. The explosion causes an instant rise in pressure, which creates a blast wave. This wave starts at the site of the explosion and travels outward. Blast injuries can occur when the blast wave hits the body. Air-filled organs such as the ears, lungs, stomach, and intestines are particularly at risk for blast injuries. This is also true for organs that are surrounded by fluid, such as the brain and the spine. Other causes of brain injuries in a blast can include being hit by flying debris, being physically thrown, or breathing toxic gases or vapors.
TBI blast injury symptoms include persistent headaches, dizziness, ears ringing, double vision, problem speaking, memory problems, or confusion, restlessness, or agitation. If you or someone you know has been exposed to a blast and are experiencing any of these symptoms, contact your healthcare team right away. For more information about traumatic brain injury, visit these websites.
All right, I'm going to skip over. So that was on AFMSCEMMTube. You can check them out right here. Anyways, I'm going to switch over to this one because I didn't learn anything from that. I'm going to go over to this video.
So for EM5, we're going to talk about blast injuries. And these injuries mostly come from a combination of the heat
and pickens
energy
on blast injuries. So see if we learn something.
So let's talk through what happens when you have a blast. So first off, you get this blast overpressure, a shock wave, basically, kind of a blast of energy. Then you get a blast wind, which is essentially just a huge gust of air. And then lastly, you have this negative pressure. And if we were to graph this all out, it would look something like this. So first you have this huge spike, that's your shock wave or blast overpressure. Then you have a blast wind, which is followed by this little bit of negative pressure dip. So a couple things you have to take into account when thinking about how much injury you might see from your blast is the distance from the blast and then what your surroundings are. So distance matters a lot, actually. The blast energy decreases with the cubed root of the distance, which basically means if you're 10 feet away from the blast, you have 8 times more blast injury than if you're 20 feet away. So it really makes a big difference. So next you have to think about what are your surroundings. So take, for example, an underwater blast. Do you think you'd have more or less injury from that? So you're actually going to have more injury. That's because water is incompressible. You're going to have a faster blast propagation and also a slower dissipation of that energy. What about if you're in an enclosed space, like inside a room? This is a meth lab. So you're going to have more injury again. So let's go back to this graph we saw before. This is what it looks like in an open air explosion. And this is what it looks like in a closed space. So you can see this blast overpressure. This energy bounces around the room in an enclosed space and causes multiple of these blast pressure waves. It can result in a lot of injury. And same thing can happen even just next to one wall. Again, that energy bounces off the wall and comes back, and you end up with kind of twice the amount of blast. Now there's 4 types of blast injury categories. We have primary, which is from the blast shock wave or overpressure. Secondary, which is from flying debris. Tertiary, in which the victim themselves gets displaced. And then quaternary, which is kind of a miscellaneous category. And each of these categories can cause various different injuries. So let's start off with primary. I think it's one of the hardest to understand. So this primary injury is caused from the blast overpressure, that shock wave, and it mainly affects spaces in the body that have an air fluid interspace. So for example, the ears, the lungs, the GI tract, and there's a couple different forces that work here. So for example, let's talk about the lungs. This has the interface of the capillaries and the alveoli as your air fluid interface. So first thing that happens is when the shock wave hits, you have this very dense, non-compressible vessel with the liquid inside, right next to the alveoli, which has compressible, lower density air. And what happens is when that force hits, it displaces the vessel into the airspace, and it usually actually ruptures the vessel, and it compresses that air a lot. So then the second thing that happens is that you have this compressed air, which then explodes back outward again. And so this causes a couple of things. It's going to probably rupture the membranes, and it can cause a mixing. So you end up with blood leaking into the alveoli, which results in ARDS and acute lung injury, and you have air leaking into the vessel, which can cause air embolism. All right, next is the secondary, which is from flying debris. And this causes a lot of penetrating trauma and also some blunt trauma. And it's actually the most common injury. And that's because the debris flies further, actually, than the shock wave. And this is where you're going to see a lot of shrapnel-type injuries. And one thing to remember is even if you have kind of a small entry wound that doesn't really look like a big deal, in a blast injury, you really need to have high suspicion that there could still be some extensive internal injury from these wounds. All right, third we have displacement. This is when the victim is actually propelled from kind of a rush of air. This is where you see a lot of crash injuries, a lot of blunt trauma. You're going to see fractures, amputations, and a lot of times brain injury as well. And then quaternary is kind of this miscellaneous category. This is where you lump into the burns, smoke inhalation, chemical injuries, and also structure collapse. There's a lot of different things lumped into that fourth category. So when you're thinking about the ABCs, specifically in field transport, make sure you get an early airway. For B, under the breathing, think of these patients with a lung injury kind of like an ARDS patient. So when setting up a vent after you've intubated them, think of using ARDS type settings. And make sure you look for and treat any pneumothorax. In circulatory, we're obviously going to get good IV access, give them fluids and blood as needed. And these patients especially, you have to look out for hemorrhage. They have vascular checks because they may have some occult injuries that you could catch.
Okay. I kind of just watched that entire thing, just in case somebody else is out there and, they can relate to things that I can't relate to. So maybe this will be good for somebody else. But I got this video, just so you guys know, from Anna Pickens, blast injuries. But, so both of these videos didn't really get into any detail, as you saw, into if you are in a one-man vehicle and the blast is directly underneath you, how the pressure is inside that little cubicle of yours and, what it does, it makes sense. She pointed out your gastral tract, your brain, your lungs are all affected by blast waves, and, that's exactly what I have. So it's good that we're looking into this kind of stuff. Maybe that's something that I should be doing, is actually just figuring it out myself. But if you guys have any videos that you think would help me out or help anybody else out that has been blown up, please let me know in the comments. And I love you guys.